In this next section, what I'd like to do is compare and contrast for you two HTML files. Now what I've done is I've taken a page off of my website. Here's the show notes for a podcast interview I did with Dave Ward on jQuery secrets. I've got some pretty standard construction. I've got a Flash player for the MP3 files and styling like what you might expect from a page like this. So let me show you the markup that's involved in order to build this page. So the first thing we encounter is the doc type. And the doc type has been the subject of quite a bit of controversy over the years. But here I am creating a doc type here that says it's the XHTML 1.0 transitional. And then I'm also declaring the namespace for my doc type, which is required within the HTML tag, which points to the appropriate namespace for the doc type. If I look further down on the file here, I've got my head, and then I'm including a script on the page. And I'm making sure to declare the MIME type because I want to make sure that should I use any other type of scripting language to create interaction on my page, that the browser can differentiate that between JavaScript and some other language. So the MIME type exists there within the script tag, and that is required. Further down, you'll see that I have some sort of plain structures in order to give style to my page. So I create a series of divs in order to make things happen. And then I've got my navigation, and it kind of goes on down the line with some pretty standard code that I would imagine you're used to seeing over and over again. Well, the rules are changed a little bit, and the techniques have changed quite a bit from how you can handle the same type of construction within HTML5. So let's go back to the browser for a moment, and I'll show you the same page, which has been refactored to use many of the new tags found in HTML5, as well as some CSS3 techniques in order to give it styling. So you notice here that these are rounded corners, but they're not images by any means. This is all text that's just been transformed with CSS. When we get into the markup, you'll see here that this whole link here will link back to the home page. However, really these are just H1 and H2 tags, and I'm doing the image replacement technique in order to make that happen. If I scroll down the page, you can see that I'm using the in-browser audio player in order to render out a player for the MP3 files, and on and on. So let's dig into the markup a little bit so you can see how it works. So the first thing you'll notice is that the doc type has been streamlined a lot. I mean, this is like a doc type that you could actually memorize. Now, the interesting thing about using the HTML5 doc type is the fact that when older browsers encounter this doc type, they won't recognize it and will automatically default into Quirks mode. And the implication is that as the browser sees tags that it doesn't recognize, it'll use some of the rules that it has internally in order to compensate for what it would consider malformed markup. Within the HTML tag, instead of having to declare a namespace, I'm just saying what language this is in. And then as I move further down on the page, you'll notice here that I'm declaring my script tag, but yet I've removed the MIME type. So within HTML5, the MIME type is not required. I don't remember the last time I used anything but JavaScript to add interaction to my pages. It's been a long time since I've used VBScript. And as far as CSS is concerned, I've never used anything else except for like native tags in order to add styling to my web pages. So the idea is that it's kind of just understood that CSS and JavaScript are the technologies of choice to use within web pages. And so they're provided by default. If you ever need to use anything else, you can, but those are the values by default. So as we go further into the code, you can see that the structure of the page has a lot more meaning, which is established by the tags. So if I take a look at the header here, you can see that all of this information here is within the header, and that's been styled up at the top of the page. Within the header, though, I can narrow down further to the H group tag, which groups headers like H1 and H2 together. And so within my style sheet, I was able to style the H group tag in order to hide the H1 and H2 and then show the background image. Now, something that's interesting that's not allowed in XHTML but is allowed in HTML5 is you'll notice here I have an anchor tag that wraps the H group. So the anchor tag before was required to be within a paragraph tag or perhaps a div, but now you can wrap an anchor around any element on the page. So I've created this larger area in order to make it clickable and provide the link location over to polymorphicpodcast.com. Further, as I move down, I've declared the official navigation on the page using the nav tag. And within there, I've done my unordered list and created navigation like you're probably used to seeing. But again, giving the semantic meaning to the navigation on the page. As I scroll down, we encounter the article, and this is the main information on the page. And so this is where the article text or the show notes text for my page exists. One of the first things that you'll notice here is that I have an H1 on the page. But if you look carefully, I have an H1 up here. Now, one of the rules that we're very aware of when it comes to search engine optimization is the fact that you can have one and only one H1 on the page. Well, this is true with older versions of HTML, but within HTML5, having more than one H1 on the page is completely legitimate. The idea is that you may have only one H1 tag per logical group on the page. And since I had this information up here in the header or even further down into the H group, and that's separate from the article, I can have separate H1 tags, and that is perfectly valid markup. So I'll continue down here. You'll notice that I have a number of different structures that I've created. Again, these are only for styling purposes, so I've chosen to use divs instead of something that has some more fine-grained semantic meaning. And then we encounter the audio control. So this is the HTML5 control for providing audio to the page. Now, I can just add the source to the control itself and point it to an MP3 file, or what I could do is create these child source elements here that would allow it to fall back on different types. MP3 is pretty well supported through the browsers, so I did it this way, but I also added in the stubs here so you could see how you could tell it to fall back to different file formats. Further, if those file formats don't work in any one of the browsers, then it will fall back to whatever you put within the middle of the tag itself. And in this case, what I've done is just injected in my old Flash player so that if things don't work out throughout any of the different options, it'll just fall back to the Flash player. And so no matter what, really this audio file should be able to be served out to the user. So I have two audio elements on the page. And then as I scroll down, we'll encounter some additional tags. So here you'll see that I'm using the mark tag, and this one's a little contrived for the demo here. Again, like I said, you might use it for a search result or some of these other types of things, but I did want to show you that the mark tag is used within the page and you can style it well. So if I go back down to the page here, you can see this is the text that's been marked. Now, Chrome will style this as a bright highlighter yellow type of color, and I've used the CSS in order to give it a more appealing yellow color. But again, I've included it here so that you can see how it can be used in today's browsers. So now I have the figure and the fig cap element right next to each other. And you can see that within figure, I have my pre-formatted text for the code. And then the figure caption is provided in order to give a label to the figure itself. As I scroll down further, we'll encounter the aside. And so here is the aside tag. And again, this is the whole idea of having a pull quote or having some information that's related to the content on the page, but it's not the most important content. So I've created the aside for links to my guest blog, as well as information about the sponsor. And so if you take a look here, here's how the aside tags show up here. And all I had to do was apply the appropriate CSS to these elements, and I got the nice rounded corners and I put them in the right place on the page. Finally, we encountered the footer. Since I've got a header, I also have a footer, and I've declared a new navigation structure and basically repeated the links down in the footer. And then I'm also using the details and summary tags on the page. Now, again, there's more functionality that's coming for how details and summary works. You should be able to have that expand and collapse type of capability. If you look in the browser right now, it just basically allows this information to be rendered out, and I can style it any way I want. But the whole point here is I'm showing you that you can use some of these tags that may not be fully implemented within the browsers. And so when the capability catches up, then your website will automatically benefit from having those capabilities. Finally, the last one that I'd like to show you here is the time tag. So you notice within time, I have the date time attribute. And when you look at this, you can see that it's the year, the month, the day, all the way down to the time, 24-hour time, down to the second, and then also the GMT offset. So this is the offset for Pacific Standard Time where I'm at. And so that's the timestamp for this page. And since it's been applied the pub date attribute, now we know that this page was last updated or published on this date. And you can only have one time tag on the page which has been stamped as pub date because that's an exclusive item on the page. Now this pub date tag also has some implications to it. If you notice here, there are no arguments found for the pub date attribute. And again, this is perfectly valid HTML5. The whole idea is that XHTML, while it was perhaps a dream for software developers and coders who like to write HTML, because you made sure that each argument had a value and the quotations were handled a certain way and everything was in lowercase and all the tags were closed correctly. This is great for software developers and great for machines. But the problem is when you have tools that are generating HTML and you have humans that are manipulating HTML, a lot of times these rules were not followed. And then the group who really suffered because of that were the end users of the websites. Because of XHTML incompliance, things would break and not show up the way they needed to. And so people had a very difficult time working with pages that were built with XHTML. So when HTML5 was spec'd out, there was a conscious decision to put the values of the end user above the values of the software developer. So you can do in HTML5 things like not include a body tag within your document. Perfectly valid HTML5. You could not close a paragraph tag. I could take off this li tag and just simply delete it, and the browser will know how to handle that, and that would be perfectly valid HTML5 markup. Now, I'm a little bit of a stickler of my markup, so I like to put that back. But keep in mind, as you encounter and as you write HTML5, that the rules are quite a bit different, and it's not an extension of XHTML, but it's actually a completely separate specification than XHTML.